So it's cold, it's dark, it's raining, and that's why I'm up at 3 o'clock in the morning, so that I can trade the Melbourne Cup. Now that is what you call commitment, but getting up at this time in the morning, at this time of the year, is a bit of a strain, but I've been doing it for many years, and that is simply because there's such a great opportunity to trade this particular race. I've been successfully betting and trading for over 2 decades. If you want more videos like this and you want me to describe more of what I do, then give us a like. If you want to talk to like-minded people, visit the BetAngel forum where you can do exactly that, but also visit our website where you can download a free trial of BetAngel. So as you may have seen from the start of this video, I will get up and trade in the middle of the night if the opportunity is there. And the opportunity is substantial. For a number of years, I have successfully traded Australian racing. And as we get towards the end of the flat turf season in the UK and we start to transition into the all-weather racing season and the jump season, all of the big races end in the UK. However, they are just starting on the other side of the world. So one of the advantages of trading a bit of Australian racing is that it sort of counterbalances what's going on in the UK. As we slide through autumn and out into winter, they're just gearing up for their new season. So the spring racing that you get in Australia can be particularly interesting. And you tend to see that the card starts to ramp up a fair bit during September. It really hits its stride in October. And then we finish with a bang with the Melbourne Cup in early November. And that's the sort of first opportunity that you see on the Australian racing calendar. As we head into December, it sort of dies down a bit because, of course, we're getting into peak summer season there and things are a little bit warmer in Australia around that time of the year. But when we come out of that period and in the middle of winter over here, when we get to February, you start to see some quality coming back onto the card again. And then, of course, at that point, they're beginning to head into their winter, or autumn. But basically, that transition begins to take place. And then, of course, we switch back to things like Cheltenham at that point in the UK. And then we get the Grand National and the Guineas and Royal Ascot. So you can see how that counterbalances a lot of activity in the UK. But typically what you're looking at is that period from September to November is a key period. And then we get another burst of activity early in the new year. As we head into late January, early February, you tend to pick up a few more group races on the card in Australia. Now, it's important to understand what you're looking at when you're trading Australian racing. There are a significant number of courses spread across an absolutely gigantic continent, and it's very different from what you'd expect to see in the UK. If we look at the major cities on the east coast, when we look at Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, Canberra, we've also got Tasmania, can't forget them. You tend to find that there's a lot of activity on the race courses on the East Coast because that is where most of the population is. As we move across the country towards South Australia and Adelaide, there's obviously a fair amount of activity at the major courses there. And then we head off to the West Coast where we've got Ascot and Belmont. Because there is such a vast difference between one side of the country and the other, you tend to see that affects the markets. So as we head across the country, you tend to get slightly less liquidity because the major conurbations, the big populations are located in those big cities, the Sydneys, the Melbournes, and all, I could mention all of them, but there are so many of them. That's where a lot of the liquidity and focus and the big races tend to be. If we go to Northern Territories, for example, we end up with Alice Springs, Darwin, those sort of race courses. And there's a big split when you look at the racing in Australia because you've got the major metropolitan courses such as Caulfield, Randwick, Flemington, just to mention a few. But those are the ones that attract the big races, the big group races. Flemington has the Melbourne Cup. You've got the Everest at Randwick, a whole variety of different types of meetings, but those are the really big meetings that attract the big crowds and the big money. And as you begin to spread out, then that begins to thin out quite a bit. But also, if we look at somewhere like Alice Springs, that is a country side course. Basically, it's not a major metropolitan course. It's in a town stroke city of 30,000 people. That's not going to be very big. It's not going to attract a huge amount of liquidity. And therefore those races will act significantly different from those big race courses. And you're sort of thinking, well, I don't know anything about Australia and I don't know where any of those places are. How do I know all of that? Well, the great thing is if you've got BetAngel, we've actually got a filter for you that you can load into Guardian that will give you an indication as to where all of these race courses are located. But there's also another reason that you should pay a lot of attention to where the race courses are, because this will radically affect the way that you choose to trade them. So one of the things that you should know about Australian racing is that you've got different racing authorities looking after different states, and therefore different rules apply in each of those. You will find commission levels rise and fall depending upon which state you're choosing to bet or trade in. But more importantly, if you are active and trading in New South Wales, then they actually have a turnover charge basically on those particular markets. New South Wales took it upon themselves to basically try and limit the amount of people who are betting on betting exchanges. And as a consequence, a turnover charge does severely restrict what you can do from a trading perspective. Basically, if you trade on a market in New South Wales, then you could find that you end up losing money overall, despite the fact that you profited because you've had to pay the turnover charge. So it's very worthwhile understanding and looking at all of the courses, understanding where each of them are. And in fact, there are some websites that you can visit as well that I often used just to double check what's coming up, where the feature races are, and specifically where they're located, just so that I don't get caught out or accidentally trade a racecourse in the different territory to the one that I'm used to, or that, you know, I've just got some general awareness of basically what's going on. It's just a bit of due diligence. But yeah, be aware that actually if you trade in New South Wales, then you could end up losing money. So it's usually better just to completely avoid New South Wales, which is a shame because there are some big races there and I will dabble into them now and again. But unless if you're completely familiar with the charges and how they're going to affect what you're attempting to do, then it's probably easier just to not trade them. So when you actively trade an Australian race, you'd be surprised how familiar it will look to you. They trade in a similar manner to those that you would see in the UK. Now, there are some differences because, like I've said to you, the big races tend to be clustered around the metropolitan courses in those big cities. And outside of that, you may find some countryside courses in the middle of nowhere that really don't turn over a lot of money. So the difference between those is much starker in Australia than it is in the UK. In the UK, even lower quality race meetings do get reasonable amounts of money, and the big ones get a lot more. But in Australia, that gap is absolutely immense. You could see 1 million traded at Flemington or Caulfield, but you may only see 20 or 30,000 pound traded at some countryside course somewhere in the middle of absolutely nowhere. So yeah, be aware of that. But fundamentally, the way that the markets trade is fairly similar to what you would expect to see in the UK. I haven't done that many videos on Australia in terms of actual live trading, simply because I'm usually up in the middle of the night. I just want to actively trade. I don't want to go through the hassle of everything else. So I haven't produced that many videos on it, but you're just going to have to take my word that they do trade in a similar manner. And the interesting thing about the big races is very often they can achieve much bigger turnover than stuff that you see in the UK. This is despite the fact that it's a generally smaller market. Overall, there's a smaller population and so on in Australia, but the big markets do get a lot of attention. So very often you will see these markets trading substantial amounts of money. And therefore, I can retrospectively get good results out of those particular markets. If you look at some of the trading that I did recently, you can see the difference between some of the smaller courses and some of the big races, the big courses reflected in my P&L. And that's just exactly the same way that you'd expect to see something like that in the UK. They trade in a similar manner. And obviously the big races tend to produce significantly bigger opportunities. So yeah, they trade in a similar way, but obviously the focus is on some of those bigger races. So the biggest race meeting of the year, or the biggest week of racing in the year, is the Melbourne Cup Carnival. It's run over 4 days, and we get the first Saturday starts with a bang with loads of really good quality group racing. Then we transition to the Melbourne Cup on the Tuesday, where obviously the Melbourne Cup itself is the big race. It can turn over many, many millions. And then we get a slightly quieter day on the Thursday, but then we get a load more group racing on the Saturday again. So it's a spectacular week of racing. And there's an awful lot of money gets bet on this particular week, and the traded volumes you will see are significant. So this is one of the weeks that I look forward to over the course of the year. It's a pivotal moment for me. And as a consequence, it's something that's been my focus for a number of years. Like I said earlier in the video, I first stumbled across the Melbourne Cup in 2005, but basically I've traded it every year since then. So this will be year 17 of trading the Melbourne Cup. And looking forward to this particular week. It's a highlight of my year, and it basically gives me the opportunity to sort of end the year on a big bang. Between then and Boxing Day, there isn't much of like massive interest for me. So this is a great opportunity to sort of put the topping on a really good year. So yeah, it's definitely the week, if you're going to do any Australian racing, that you should have a look, because some of the volume and activity that you'll see in the market will be the highest that you will see over the course of the year. Now, one key important aspect of Australian racing that you need to be aware of is over the course of a week, that will radically change the sort of opportunities that you see, because all of the big metropolitan courses, the group racing, takes place on a Saturday. So those are the days to sort of tune in if you want to see high liquidity, big markets, because especially at key times of the year, that will be where all of those occur. They also do quality racing on a Wednesday as well. You get a few metropolitan courses on a Wednesday that typically appear on the card. But when you're looking at Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, then they can sort of be a mishmash of lower quality racing and the country courses. So as a consequence, they tend to be much lower liquidity. And it could be that you've just tuned in to look at those and you think, oh my God, this is awful. But you're not seeing a true representation of Australian racing. Get that nice little bump on a Wednesday, get loads of good quality stuff that takes place on Saturday, pretty much throughout the year, but higher at certain times of the year. And you get loads of different types of racing on a Sunday, but it's a very stark difference between that and a Saturday. So yeah, it's not like in the UK where you get reasonable quality stuff, or perhaps, you know, multiple days of group racing, and they tend to occur in specific times of the week. So yeah, don't turn up on a Thursday expecting to see something amazing, because it's unlikely that you will. You've got to focus on those key days of the week. But also, don't forget that obviously the bank holidays and the holiday periods in Australia are different from the UK. So sometimes you get little peaks around those periods as well. So yeah, don't follow the same calendar as you do in the UK, either from a trading perspective or from looking at where those key opportunities occur on public bank holidays. It's a very different structure to what you see in the UK. So you should have a few pointers there, but I'm going to summarize them for you here. The Australian racing is seasonal. It tends to sort of begin to pick up in sort of August, September, October, and then we sort of finish with a bang with the Melbourne Cup Carnival in early November. It does trundle on for a little bit longer, so there's still plenty of opportunities there. But December, January, it goes quiet because they're in the peak of their summer. And then we get a little pickup again from February, where we get more group racing back on the card again, until they descend into their winter. The Melbourne Cup Carnival is the biggest race of the year. It's coming up soon, just after I've produced this video. So if you're going to look at some big, high quality Australian racing, now is the time to do it. There will be plenty between now and then, and there will be a bit afterwards as well. So if you're going to look at some Australian markets, this is the best time to do it. You tend to find all of these big feature races occur on the Saturday. You also get a little bump on a Wednesday, but all of the other days in between tend to be a mishmash of lower grade racing and countryside courses. So if you tune in on a Tuesday or a Wednesday or a Thursday, you're probably not going to see Australian racing at its full strength. You need to be there on a Saturday to see that full capability, or at a major festival, a major carnival like the Melbourne Cup. But also be aware that if you try and trade a market in New South Wales, you may actually lose money trading because of the turnover charge. So you need to have some awareness of the geography of exactly what you're trading, and the quality of the racing that you're trading as well, because that will directly influence your ability to profit from it, and also to be able to do that without falling into the trap of paying too much commission or a turnover charge. But yeah, Australian racing is something I've traded for a large number of years, and therefore it's something that I would recommend to you. I know it's not for everybody, and not everybody is going to be that committed to it as I am, but I've enjoyed it for a number of years. It's definitely an opportunity and something you should explore.